Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Research's seminar series on measuring progress and well-being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Laura Fumagalli, who will discuss subjective well-being, social comparisons, and gender composition of the reference group. Laura will speak for around 40 minutes and then address questions at the end. At that time, please raise your virtual hands or post your questions in the chat. During the presentation, please keep your microphones muted. And a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Now to introduce Dr. Laura Fumagalli. She is a research fellow at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex. Her research interests are in the area of empirical economics and survey methodology. Most of her research focuses on understanding the determinants of well-being and mental health of various policy-relevant groups, such as children, parents, and people in debt. She was also interested in how gender differences in how people answer survey questions, including well-being questions, affect data quality and the conclusions that can be drawn from these data, which of course is the subject of today's seminar, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Without further ado, Laura, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to give this talk, and I'm looking forward to your comments and suggestions. There was in this room, there is a clock that is broken, so I have to keep my phone. I'm not texting my friends, I'm just looking at the time. If you just look down, sorry, it just it is. So as introduced, so this talk is about subjective well-being, social comparison, and the gender composition of the reference group. It's not very difficult to motivate this talk, especially to an audience like you, very experienced in well-being. But the motivation is that subjective well-being data has been used increasingly in social science and more also for the evaluation of public policies. For example, the ONS, you may know that the ONS in the UK has now a standard set of questions to evaluate well-being, and basically they use it to evaluate and discuss policies such as housing or credits, policies that are really relevant for them. So it's not like the philosophy of well-being anymore, but it's also the practicality of how these data are used. The problem with this, well, obviously this is exciting because this kind of opens up a question of opportunity, but it makes it even more important for us who are interested in well-being, because we have kind of the responsibility to do data well. And the reason, one of the main problems, the mental problems people go through when asking a well-being question, is still quite unknown, still a black box, especially, I guess, for economists who are a bit less used to understanding the psychology behind the question, although we are trying to learn from our colleagues, psychologists and other fields to do that better and better. So in particular, people can differ in the reference points or reference group, more specifically, they have in mind when evaluating well-being. So I think it's very important to understand the role of reference point, that can help us understanding well-being and well-being data and how they can be used for policy evaluation, for example. So in this talk, quickly, I will discuss the role of social comparison. It's kind of my take in social comparison. I guess it's quite personal, and I would like to discuss you if you have like different views. Then I was kind of focused on recent paper that address what is, for me, is kind of the most interesting or less studied aspects around this bigger points of topic of subjective well-being in the reference group. And then I present a paper on my own research on the role of the gender composition of the reference group. Obviously, while this, I really acknowledge this literature is very interdisciplinary, and there are other fields, psychology in particular, but many fields where this topic is really relevant. My perspective, because of my background is on economics, not because they value other contribution, quite the opposite, but because this is where I come from. And also, for the same reason, I'll give more priority to stuff that is more experimental or quasi-experimental method, because it's what I'm mostly interested in, and also because I think that it's where kind of the literature is going a little bit in the recent years. And obviously, I'll give priority to relatively recent contributions. So speaking of recent, let's go back to the 19th century or the early 20th century. And just to show how long this idea of social comparison and reference group has been around. Not only has been around for a long time, but also in very different fields. So we have Veblen, so economics. We have... Sorry?
I think you can continue, Laura. Sorry, I think someone was unmuted, but you should be. Yeah. So
we have Russell, we have sociologists and psychologists, and values. So these quotes, they all kind of say the same thing, that we care about social comparison. Obviously, economists that have more an interest on accumulation, pecuniary strengths. Sociologists, they are more interested in relative deprivation. Psychologists speak about opinions and ability, but the framework is the same. But what I think is what I put in red is it's how these people speak about the comparison group. So Veblen speaks about a generic rest of the community. Russell makes a very specific point. They say that beggars don't compare themselves to billionaires, but other beggars. So they really restrict the point to people very similar to themselves. They say that the comparison group to other people who are very far away is not even relevant. Merton speaks about significant others. So whatever subjectively is significant for the person. And Festinger also speaks about others, and it makes the point quite similar to Russell, although less extreme, about the fact that how relevant the reference group is. The relevance of the reference group decreases with the distance between us and the reference group. And I think, so this is quite, it kind of, in this post, there is some idea that the reference group is important, it has to be defined, it's defined somehow, but there are no very clear definition of the reference group. And I think this is where the literature I've seen in the recent years, it kind of can make the most interesting contribution, I think, in the reference group, defining the reference group. So basically, in this, from these old quotes, we have three take-home points. The first one I won't discuss much longer, is that we care about social comparison. I think I'll take it as it is. Then it seems on this early contribution that we like to be the big fish in the small pond, and then. Sorry, I think I didn't have the latest without the typos. And that's fine. And then we compare ourselves with people somehow like us, but it's not very clear what this like us is. So, so let's look at these small ponds, big fish in small ponds. So you might have heard, especially if you're Italian, this thing is quite discussed. This quote by Plutarch about Caesar going with his troop to a village in the Alps, and because the people in this troop were like making fun of the kind of the simplicity of the life in the Alps, he says, "I prefer to be here, the first one here, than the second in Rome." And this is kind of links to this definition that we prefer to be the big fish in the small pond, and links to what has been said. But except that we don't really do it all the time, because Caesar himself didn't stay in the Alps. In fact, he went to Rome, ended up in a civil war, ended up being the first in Rome, and ended up being killed. So he didn't choose the small pond and the life, the happy life in the Alps, but he went into something that was more exciting, but also more dangerous and also somehow less pleasurable, I guess, as the picture somehow says. So, so there is a bit of a tension between these motives of the motives of ambition and the pleasure that is given by being the big fish in a small pond. And there was again, my take of the literature here is a summary. There is a literature in economics booming at the beginning of the 2000s, when there was this enthusiasm for surveys. And basically what people do, they just get the survey and they regress and try to test this relative income effect hypothesis, which is the big fish in a small pond hypothesis, by regressing some form of measure of subjective well-being on measure of income, mostly, of some reference group. And the idea is income, or some measure of relatively positioning income. And the idea is that if our subjective well-being increases with our relative position, regarding in the income distribution, says this relative, we have some evidence supporting the relative income effect hypothesis. And in fact, this, as you can see in the left column, in fact, this literature does find quite a lot of evidence supporting the relative income effect, but it also finds the opposite. So what are called tunnel effects. So that our subjective well-being is higher when we are the small fish in the pond, or mixed results. They depend which survey we use, the type of the specification, including the type of how the reference group is defined. So I think like a quite interesting sub-strand in the literature is trying to understand how our the fact that we like to be relatively better off compared to our peers, and our ambition to kind of better ourselves can coexist. So how relative income and tunnel effects can coexist, or if we say with the terminology of, I believe, psychology, how self-enhancement and self-improvement motives can exist. So there is a very new, I think it's not even a working paper, paper by Kubitz and Page, trying to model this. And I don't know, you may want to keep an eye on it when it comes out, and try to model this process by claiming that anticipatory utility of set incentives to choose a low reference point by rewarding high aspiration, and people set the reference points at the time of their expectation in a way that their expectations are meaningful. Hopefully this paper can turn out to be quite a new, interesting contribution in the literature. So here we say like we like to be the big fish in a small pond, but not quite all the times, and not at some point we also want to change a pond and try to become the big fish of that pond. And so this is, I think, hopefully I discussed that, and then I would like to discuss these points of who are these people like us. And in particular, I think that this is the part of the literature that I find quite the most interesting, and where there are quite a few new contributions. So this is still the matrix I showed you before, which wasn't really a matrix because it had like this weird white space on the left, and this is because this part was missing. So basically, this is to say this is literature. In this literature, the comparison group is not basically the researchers, they don't ask the data about the comparison group. They don't find any evidence in the data, but they just assume the comparison group themselves. And initially, the first papers, they try to they construct the comparison group based on characteristics that they think the researchers thought were indicative of the comparison group, like occupation, age, gender. While I'll say, especially in economics, since economists are kind of a bit skeptical of whatever it cannot be really testers, has to be assumed. So they say, okay, let's focus on proximity, because at least I know that people who live next to other people, they somehow interact with the neighbors. Why? I don't know if I even know, say, the salary of other people in my own profession, unless they are in my being. And this literature, really, when you change the comparison group, especially in the sub-literature on proximity, the results change a lot. So it's the fact that we are having very mixed results from the role of the comparison group, actually indicating kind of a tension between ambition and liking to be the big fish, which is surely true, and in how much these mixed results and kind of messy results indicate the fact that we are not able to define the reference group. Perhaps the reference group was wrong, and this is why we find different results in the literature. So to understand this, there is quite a relatively new literature. This is one of the earliest contribution I could find. They say, okay, let's try and ask the data what the reference group is. So the first method to try and understand the reference group is just ask the respondents. So this paper by Clark and Senig uses European data, and basically they ask the respondents about how much they are interested in comparison in general and who they compare themselves with. And they find that basically those who identify a comparison group, the majority compare to their work colleagues, or to a far lesser extent to their friends. Then some people compare themselves to family, other people, but these are the main two groups people compare themselves to. Another approach is just instead of asking, because obviously if you ask people, they may not know, they might have never thought about it, and they didn't, probably people don't have time during the survey, they want to put the effort to actually try and understand themselves how the mental process they go through. So probably better from economist point of view, better method or alternative method is looking at revealed preference. So there is this quite nice paper by Watson and Stulia where they exploit a mobility program for medical students in the US, and they have information, both information, some also exogenous information generated by randomized information experiments about the relative people's beliefs about relative position in different locations in the US, and they see how this correlates with their actual choices. And they see that they actually people they would like to live in places where their income is higher relatively to neighbors. But these results are driven by people who are married. In fact, for singles who may benefit from tunnel effect, this is not the case. So singles may want to settle in places where there are the small fish, probably because they want to be able to interact with bigger fish, and that increase their social mobility. And the third type of approach, which has been, I think, quite popular in the last 10 years, is using experiments, either natural, lab, or survey experiments. And this is kind of, so my kind of understanding of the kind of most recent / more interesting contribution of this sub-literature. So the idea is, well, I don't know the reference points, I don't know the reference group, but I can infer it if I see an exogenous change in an attribute of this reference group, or information about this attribute. And I also can see a contemporaneous change in individuals' subjective well-being. Then I can infer that that reference group is relevant for that. The reference group, the people's well-being depend on reference group, and that particular reference group is relevant for people's well-being. So here I listed 4 papers plus mine that I'm gonna touch in the second part of the talk. So the first one, Kuhn et al. Is Kujai uses random variation in the income of nervous induced by a lottery win. So it seems like if I live next to somebody who has won the lottery, if my subjective well-being changes or not. And they don't find much on the actual subjective well-being, but they find a lot on consumption, in particular consumption of positional goods like cars and stuff. So this is kind of opens up like a secondary question of how much subjective well-being the correlation between subjective well-being and actions, which is being found to be there, but not quite one-to-one. So it's another interesting point. But this paper concludes that reference group seems to matter, but probably not all of this action going on does translate into changes in reported subjective well-being. Then there are this is pure natural experiment. Then we have Card et al. And Perestulia 2020, where they are slightly different because one uses more like a field experiment or random variation generated by the experiment, while the other one exploits quasi-random variation generated by the sudden kind of an information shock at the national level. But basically exploits how if subjective well-being changes when they randomly are exposed to more information about the pay or the income of people like them, who are co-workers in the Card case and famous citizen in the Perestulia case. And they do find effect on subjective well-being in the direction we think. The people who are the low side of the comparison, they have lower subjective well-being. People whose incomes is lower than the comparison group, they have the report lower subjective well-being, and also intention to say change job in the case of Card. So these are natural or field experiment. Then we have McBride and Ifker that are like more lab experiments, where basically they have different setting and different measures of well-being. But what they both do is try and understand whether the subjective well-being of the participant in a lab experiment is affected by knowing the performance of other participants. So it's, again, they exploit variation and information about the ranking as opposed to information about, as opposed to variation in the ranking itself. But this is the same. So they kind of get to the same conclusion that a position, your relative position compared to other participants, that does affect subjective well-being, even in stuff that is not very relevant, like experiments with relatively small payoffs, monetary payoffs. Yeah, and then the paper I would like to discuss today is a paper that has been published almost 3 years ago now, and it is on GIBO and tests how subjective well-being changes, where the reference group, and particularly the gender of the reference group is experimentally assigned. So like the others, this is a survey experiment. And at the time, it wasn't that as used as now, but yeah, it's another way of using experimental, kind of a mid ground between using survey data and using experimental data. You do experiments in the survey. So I don't know, like, do I take any question now, or I wait until the end? Would you prefer?
Unless somebody has a clarifying question, I think we can proceed. So in which case, raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we'll continue.
Because it's kind of a natural break.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the paper. Why gender? Why am I interested in gender? Yeah, so the motive one, gender is in the subjective well-being literature, the reference point literature in particular. Gender hasn't been really exploited much. And I do think it is interesting. So that was kind of a personal motivation, but also there is a bit of a motivation in the literature. There is this very famous paper at the time, the data are quite old, by Stevenson and Wolfer, showing that in the US and in most European countries, women's subjective well-being has declined relative to men, despite the enormous gain women achieved in education, labor market, and civil rights. So that kind of, some people are saying, well, so probably women's gains are not worth because people are not happy about the way their gains. So we want to understand when is the case. So why this happens. So this is kind of as a policy implication alongside the, I think, the importance theoretically of understanding the reference group. So, okay. So Bertrand's, there are various keynotes and articles she wrote on this topic, and she puts forward a few explanations, but one explanation has never been tested, and is, she said, in the past, probably women mainly compare themselves with other women, and now they increasingly compare themselves with men. So there's the reference group changing, and women are still more disadvantaged than men in many life domains. If in those life domains you compare yourself, and you're a woman, more and more with men, you're going to compare yourself more and more with somebody who is less disadvantaged than you, and this is going to decrease your subjective well-being. Or the other way around, if you compare yourself with other women, your subjective well-being should increase because the income or the outcome of this reference group, of this new induced comparative reference group is lower. So the first question is, do women report higher subjective well-being when they compare themselves to other women? If the hypothesis has never been tested directly, so we thought at the time that there was some scope for testing it formally. So what we do, we implement a randomized control trial, a survey experiment of Wave 5 of the Study Society Innovation Panel, and we prompt some women to evaluate their subjective well-being. That in our case is measure satisfaction about 4 outcomes: health, income, leisure, and life overall, by comparing themselves to other women. And we leave other respondents' reference unconstrained. So these questions about objective well-being are the questions used in understanding society. So that can also, the results can also shed light of how these widely used understanding society questions work, and a lot of people have used them. So hopefully that can help other researchers as well. And these are also kind of standard questions that are used in other surveys. So hopefully the results can also have users of other surveys. So the idea is if at least some women naturally, without being prompted compare themselves to men, women who are left unconstrained report lower subject well-being, especially or only in domains where women are more disadvantaged than men, because it means changing the comparison group to a comparison group where the disadvantage is or where I'm more likely to be above average. And then we carry out the same experimental tests on men to test asymmetric effects on interpersonal comparisons. So the data are from the Understanding Society Innovation Panel. If I have a little bit of time, I'm just telling you a bit about this because I think it's an amazing resource that could be used more. So the Understanding Society is the largest survey, panel survey, and it's been running since 2009, and before it was the BHPS. It's kind of the continuation of the BHPS. But since 2009, there is a separate sample, which is the Innovation Panel. And it has the same survey, the same sample design as the Understanding Society panel. So it's a stratified and cluster sample. It should be representative of the population living in Britain south of the Caledonian Canal in 2009. But there are a lot of refreshment samples in the Innovation Panel. The innovation panel includes experimental, methodological, and substantive topics. And what I'd like to tell you is like it's open. The call is open to researchers. I think the call goes out about at the beginning of the new year, and it closes around February, March. I think it used to close in February, now it's a bit later. And there is a 2-page application form, and people can apply. And then if they win the competition, which has become quite competitive, you have the opportunity of absolutely no cost to add your questions into the innovation panel. People assist you, they're amazing, they help you with the question design. The only problem you cannot ask more than 1 or 2 questions. You can do like 15 questions, just 2 questions. But the good thing is that you can exploit other experiments or other information like demographics or any information that is also collected, or any longitudinal, because this is a panel, any longitudinal information. So people had to have a child 4 years ago, or when they get married. So you can also use this information. Yeah. So this experiment is a winning project of the 2011 public call, but it took us a little bit of time to get that. So basically, the control question is the classic control question for Understanding Society, and how the satisfier is satisfied, and you with your whatever the life domain is, with the 4th life domain being the one I mentioned, and then the treatment question, we kind of modified it slightly, and we said how dissatisfied or satisfied that you with your life domain if you compare yourself with other women for women and men for men. The answers are measured through Likert scales with these options, 7 options, going from completely dissatisfied to completely satisfied. This is standard, although we are now trying to have it changed because we will see. To avoid, since treatment can be very difficult with the treatment is quite cognitively demanding, and also that it can be very difficult for people, and particularly less educated people or specific people, to distinguish between different degrees of satisfaction or satisfaction. We just group this answer into satisfied, neutral, and dissatisfied. This is quite is done in some of the literature. So what do we think? What are the testable prediction? I think a quite easy case, like the most straightforward case, is the case of income, where we know that there is a gender income gap. We know that women in general have lower income than men on average, and the treatment effect increase in the perceived gender gap of the treated, and also the share of the men in the ex-ante pre-treatment reference group. Even if I think that's obviously the more I think that these women are disadvantaged, the more that affects the treatment group, but I can think that women are very disadvantaged in income, but having already all just women in my treatment group, and the treatment effect would be zero, even despite a perceived income effect, gender income effect. Very quickly, we have a model, but it's just a toy model, and what we are thinking is kind of an idea of utility when you have this UI, which is like an absolute type of utility plus a component that could be positive or negative, which is a relatively utility and depends on how your income in this case compared to the income, the weighted average of the income of your people in your reference group. And with the treatments, we experimentally modified the reference group by kind of shutting down, by severing some of these links that I had initially. For example, some mails. I was my male co-workers, and then if I get treated, I just remove from my weighted average the G's, in this case corresponding to my male. So this is the case of income. Is quite easy. For other topics, it's a bit less. It's a bit less easy to predict what the treatment effect should be. For leisure, it really depends. It really depends. Where is the perceived gender gap, leisure gender gap? The literature points toward women being more disadvantaged than men in leisure, but men may think the opposite. The gender health gradient is very unclear because women live longer than men, but reports worse health, worse mental health, higher pain level, and they're probably discriminated against in the health system. And the effect of life overall is really indeterminate because people have to assess all these aspects of their life and then weight them somehow and formulate a question. So like this, this paper by Benjamin said this is a very difficult process. Yeah. So what we find. So here you see, so since the treatment is experimental, so we don't have any endogeneity problem. We just compare. We don't compare the same person before and after, but we compare people untreated and people treated. And since the treatment assignment is random, there shouldn't be any difference between them. We have a balance table. There is just one variable that was unbalanced, and we control for it in this regression. So basically, we see what we kind of expect, that the treatment effects are. These are marginal effects for order probits and multinomial probits. The triangles are women and the squares are men. And we see that the treatment is relevant for income. And treated women report about 2 percentage points, bit less than 2 percentage points, less satisfaction. The probability of reported satisfaction is 2 percentage points lower, and about 2 percentage points higher the probability of reporting satisfaction. We have qualitatively similar results for leisure, with the difference that the treatment effect is about half, so it's about just below 1 percentage point. You can see it in the second row on the left. For men, we find nothing, although for income, the point estimates are negative, as we expect, because men are just asked to compare themselves to a more advantaged treatment group. For health and overall, we find basically nothing. We have something on health on the dissatisfied, but we have very little. We think that this is due to the fact that it's cognitively difficult to answer these questions. And this is also exemplified by the fact that we have a spike in neutral answers, and we think that this spike can be due to people being just overwhelmed, not being able to answer the question, and just clicking the neutral answer as a way of not responding. We have something of a heterogeneous effect where we use, and this is, the results are just suggestive, but I think it's interesting because we use, it shows you how can you use other experiments in innovation panels. So we have some from past other ways and other experiments, we have some indication of the gender gap in leisure within the couples. We have, this is for leisure, and then we have some indication of the gender gap in the gender pay gap, depending on depending on the sector that we're in. And we find some suggestive evidence that we have larger treatment effect where the gender gap, the leisure gender gap is larger and the pay gap is large. So they are not statistically significant, but the sign is there. So that could be like something perhaps we need to test with a better sample size at the choose. Just quickly, yeah. So we just do a very last thing to try and tackle this problem of the treatment effect being too cognitively demanding for some people, and then kind of messing out with the ordinality assumption that is needed for the probits. We follow this literature in survey methods suggesting that people who have to answer like a cognitively demanding question, they tend to use the middle answer as an alternative to no response, or just an alternative as a way of no necessarily next effort. And since the treatment question is very cognitive demanding, that could be disproportionately affecting treated people. So we want to correct, because it's a treatment effect. It is a treatment effect, which is random, but it's not a treatment effect we want to see. We want to polish this treatment effect. So quickly, what you do at the time, it was quite new. Now it's known. So we use the middle inflated order, the probits, which is simply a skip. So the idea is people first decide whether to give a genuine or spurious answer. A spurious if they just cannot be, you know, they don't want to answer the question, they just put the middle option. And then if you decide they want to give a genuine answer, they give you whatever the satisfying neutral satisfies. So basically, we use maximum likelihood and we model together these two probabilities. So basically, we capture the idea that a neutral answer could be a result of a spurious neutral answer or an actually neutral answer, while the dissatisfied satisfies are all general neutral answer, and we try to remove this. We try to remove the spurious neutral answer from the real neutral answer to see if that polishes a little bit the results. It's all these maximum likelihood models. They are identified by functional form, but if you have, it's better to have an exclusion restriction, maybe to break the collinearity between the two processes. So again, here another thing we use from the innovation panel. There are other experiments that are random, that are decided by somebody else. So there is one sending a motivational letter to try and exogenously change the effort in answering the question, and we think that this may affect the probability of using spurious neutral answer. Or also we use something that is kind of quasi-experimental, which is the number of neutral answers reported in other questions, similar measured by the Likert scale, that can be affected by other experiments. There are a lot of experiments with this. And Green we have this exclusion restriction in another paper on similar topic, and Green also has it, and they seem to work quite well.
Laura, we should.
Yeah, we have this slide. So the slide said that when we When we correct for this, we also have treatment effects of almost 1 percentage point for health. So especially, now for women, treated women reports are less likely to report to be unsatisfied about health, and are more likely about 0.5 percentage points to, sorry, and yeah, it's almost 1 point more likely to report more satisfaction. So yeah, so basically when they're prompted to compare themselves to other women, women report high satisfaction about income and leisure, and when we control for cognitively attenuation bias due to cognitively demanding questions about health. Yeah, this is it.
Thank you very much, Laura. Everyone, please feel free to either write in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question. And Laura, I think if I may, I will start. So I just wanted to clarify something real quick. So you have these 4 domains primarily, and you ask them to be prompt in each question, right? It's not that there's a prompt at the beginning that says, please compare yourself to women. You say in each question, how satisfied are you if you compare yourself to other women? That's correct?
Yeah, yeah. So in each question, but we have the same treatment for all the question, because we don't have one, like, so if I'm treated, I'm completely for all the questions.
And is there any way to disentangle, it sounds like there isn't, just you're inducing them to compare. Now, the assumption is that they're comparing anyway, but you have, I would say, 2 treatment effects. To compare, like you're explicitly making life satisfaction and other satisfactions comparable, and you're asking them to compare with a particular group.
Yeah, so this is a good question. And yeah, this is a limitation of the study. I think one way of somehow claiming that it doesn't, so that the actual comparison as opposed to the type of comparison doesn't drive the results, is because that the effects across differ across domain in a way that is understandable, the way this is coherent with the theory. So if it was just comparison, you probably would expect all domain to go in the same way, and probably not male and female to go in different direction. The reason why we did at the time, so another alternative could have been, and we wanted to do it, but then it's not easy to get the opportunity to do it. The innovation panel is asking some people to compare to women and some people to compare to men. The problem with this would be that it's a bit difficult, even more cognitively demanding for me, who I'm a man, who I am a woman, to compare myself to men only. So that could be kind of a very difficult question, and probably not very close to what happens. And then another disadvantage of this is that this idea was, when we did this, was try and skip the understanding society question, because we want to know what's going on there. So we want to compare that kind of hypothetical thing to something that is relevant for a lot of researchers. But you're perfectly, yeah, I completely agree with you that there is potential some effects of the actual comparison.
Yep.
Yeah, this is discussed quite well in Seneca and Clark paper, when they ask about the strength of the comparison and the type of the comparison, the object of the comparison.
Your response makes sense, though. It's so unfortunately you can't disentangle, but the fact that it's different across different domains, and also for the heterogeneous analysis, so it's more important for certain groups of people that you would expect it to be, which also made me think a little bit about the heterogeneity. What was your sample size? Is it possible to further split this by age groups or generation? I was also thinking about social media use.
Yes, so that was 2011. So the data were 2011. So there was no much asked or nothing asked to people. So the sample size, but unfortunately, because that would maybe too. So since the Understanding Society income questions ask about household income, we have to restrict the sample to single people. So we end up having about for the income people about 500 people as opposed to 700 people. Yeah, so there were not many heterogeneous effects. This was also in the context of a bigger experiment. So the sample size of the innovation panel is about, it depends because there is a refreshment, there is a lot of attrition precisely because these are used as a guinea pig, but it's about between 1,000 and 2,000. People in general, they try to put too many treatments or restrict the sample, then you don't have sample size for the heterogeneous effect. So here, we did those because we had some sample size. We could have done age. The point is, age is not very clear how there are so many things changing with age. Is your reference group change with age, but also your gender gap. So we wanted to do some heterogeneous effect where it was kind of clear, the question was, or the information used was explicitly of one of the two aspects rather than something that can affect two, to try and understand, to try and disentangle the effects. Also because, for example, feminists are more likely to have, from stuff we have read, seems that they are more likely to have higher salaries, they're more likely to go in occupation like to work and to do STEMs, but also more likely to have more female in their reference group. So the two things, they go, some aspect they affect both of the two aspects, the gender gap and the regional reference group composition. So yeah.
It's also rather interesting. So you said that, and Francesco, you can go next. This is just single people, so it's already
just in the single people, just in the income, because the household, because of how the question was asked. That was a bit
okay. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, for the leisure, we only get people in couple because for the heterogeneous effect of the leisure, we only get the people in couple because for them we know how they are their leisure.
Okay.
Split.
I'll let Francesco go and then may come back. And please, anybody else, if you have a question, either write in the chat or raise your hand. Francesco?
Yep. Thanks a lot, Laura. That was fascinating, and I especially enjoyed the big picture you managed to provide in such a short time. My question relates a little bit to the scalability of the method. Basically, you showed us that you could use experiments to identify relevant components in a reference group. And my question is, can you use the same method to test at the same time for multiple dimensions? So I expect that reference group is composed by more than just one aspect. I can compare myself to Kelsey, not just because he's a man, but also because he's an economist and speaks very well English. Is there a way to use this method to evaluate the components of I think you got me the elements of a reference group in one shot?
I think, well, so just full disclosure, this thing was, this particular paper was done in 2011 when all this literature was not really developed. So it was done because I was interested Bertrand hypothesis, and just after I realized that I could have shed light on this. But I think probably, so more than this one, probably any information experiment can be used, because if you have any information, you can disclose differently. So you can just disclose information about a specific group, and you see which type of information affects people' life satisfaction. And I think probably the innovation panel is quite nice, because you know quite a lot about people. You know how many children they have, when they became mothers. So perhaps you can say, you know, people who became mother in your ear say that, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's probably possible using something like the innovation panel, where you know people, you know how the people are, you can perhaps disclose the same information on different people with different dimensions. That could be a way of testing kind of a horse racing between various type of reference group. And I think, to be honest, it would be less less questionable than this one, because this one I've done, it's now we know that it's probably better to give. There are Roth, for example, always says that it's better to compare two treatments, because the passive control is never is. So then it kind of, you conflate the fact of being treated and the effect of the treatment, which also it also applies to this one. While perhaps by giving different treatment or different reference group to different people, but where both are treatment, you kind of solve the two problems. So the comparing different reference group, and also to kind of polish the effect of being treated from the effect of the treatment effects. And yeah, at the moment I'm really interested. We've done other information experiments on other stuff, and I think information experiments are quite cheap, but also quite informative, because you can, I don't know, measure belief before, and this is what the student does, and then give an information experiment and see if belief change and the subject well-being changes. It's quite interesting. It can be done with a relatively low sample size, because they're not cognitively demanding. You don't have to correct much. And with like 400, 500 people, you can get quite a lot per treatment group. You can get quite a lot of results with information experiments, I'll say, in my experience.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. I think we're at 6 o'clock. I don't see any other questions. And
may I? Can I
oh,
go?
yeah, Julia, yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for your seminar. It was very interesting. I have some, curiosity always, that I don't know that we can check on this data, or ever, if not maybe with qualitative questionnaires, but that's on a side. I was wondering what the policy implication of your research would be, and especially in the matter of when we do questionnaires, what should we ask what the reference group is when people answer these questions, or do you think that we should just leave it in a way that then we can sort of infer what people do when they answer these questions of subjective well-being?
Yeah, my understanding, also like criticized in my own work, it is very difficult to understand, to make people think about the reference group. So I see two types of research I would be interested in. One is going very full steam on this and trying to see whether their process, I don't know, like I know people with psychology, they use EEG, or try kind of stuff that detects emotion. That could be a way. So making, or now there is this, for example, this new paper by Sanchez about open question, how information from open question can be used quantitatively. So I think one thing could be take the Clark and Senning 2010 idea of asking people, but do it in a way that you can really understand through all this new technique. And the other idea is I think I really like this idea of using experimental variation and then see how subjective well-being changed with different experimental variation, kind of this indirect way of testing the reference group. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Laura, and thank you to the participants who are still remaining. I think we can shut it down there, and we'll see you next time. Laura, any last points for us?
No, thank you very much for the invitation. It was very interesting also for me to try and give a more general overview, and it really helped me as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you very much.